Welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon. The Force is strong with this one.
Hello there and welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon, your guide to the wider Star Wars canon through the comic book lens. And to take you on this journey, I'm your host, Mike Burton. And so brings episode 67. So guys, this week I am tackling the first volume of the 2020 Dr. Aphra run of comics. That is going to be issues 1 to 5, making up the story Fortune and Fate. Now before we get started, for any new listeners, I go through the story, I give you general bullet points of what the plot is all the way through at the end, so there are going to be spoilers of this, but I also talk about mainly the connective tissue and things, bring up species that get mentioned, bring up planets, sort of other random bits and pieces of information, and other connective tissue that connects to other Aphra stuff and other stuff in the wider Star Wars canon. So with that in mind, before delving into this one, I would recommend people have read the prior Aphra comics. It is not essential, there's loads of little things that kind of get referenced and whatnot, but if you haven't read those Aphra comics and you haven't listened to Star Wars Comics in Canon, then go back and check those out on my YouTube channel. It's a nice little playlist so you can see all the Aphra episodes, but generally speaking they're like every 4 episodes. So the last Aphra episode I tackled was the finale of the first run of them, which started in 2016. It was done by Kieran Gillen and Simon Spurrier, but this run is done by Alyssa Wong. Now, episode 63 of Star Wars Comics in Canon was where I finished the Aphra run, and I started it all the way back on episode 34. Now, for clarity, Aphra was introduced in the 2015 Darth Vader comics, also by Kieran Gillen, and I tackled the first volume of that in episode 15 of Star Wars Comics in Canon. So that's a kind of background reading for Aphra, just before we get into the details of this, and I will also clarify that I did the War of the Bounty Hunters prelude and the first chapter of it in episodes 60 and 64 of Star Wars Comics in Canon. That does incorporate these Aphra comics, as in the 2020 run. However, the prelude started on Dr. Aphra number 10. So what I'm going to be doing is this week, and then in about 4 or 5 episodes time, I'll be then tackling the next issue of Dr. Aphra, and then they'll all lead on to the War of the Bounty Hunters crossovers, which I have already been tackling. So that's basically enough rambling and whatnot for me. All the information is in the description of everything I've spoken about. So with all that in mind, let's get into the details of this comic run itself. So issue number 1 was released in May 2020, issue 5 was released in October 2020, the trade paperback collection was released in January 2021, and the first volume of this and the story arc is also called Fortune and Fate. The writer for these comics is Alyssa Wong, the artist was Marika Cresta, and the colour artist is Rachelle Rosenberg. And these comics all take place around 3 years after the Battle of Yavin, which is around the time of Empire Strikes Back. Now, the start of this comic will indicate it is after Empire Strikes Back. Just for clarity, AB-wise, after the Battle of Yavin, the Battle of Yavin was in A New Hope, so when they blew up the Death Star, that was the Battle of Yavin. So between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back is 3 years, and then between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi it is about 1 year. So this is in that year in between of Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and that is where this run's going to take place, the second Star Wars run takes place, the third Darth Vader run takes place, the Bounty Hunters run takes place, and all of those culminate together to make the War of the Bounty Hunters crossover, which I tackle in episodes 60 and 64 of Star Wars Comics in Canon. So that's generally the background information and that sort of stuff. So let's get into the first issue of this, and I will read the crawl out shortly, but there's a little prologue beforehand. So it starts off on Hoth, which is the icy planet seen in the first act of Empire Strikes Back. So you've got some Imperials that are searching the remains of the rebel base, and Aphra is disguised as a transport driver. So Aphra takes this transport down a couple of routes which the Imperials are a little bit concerned about. They put a gun to her head and tell her to turn around, and then Black Chrysanthemum and a character called Too Bleak pop out and then ambush the Imperials, shooting them. Now, Black Chrysanthemum is a black Wookiee. He is in all the other Aphra comics, really. He's also in the Darth Vader comics, the 2015 run a bit as well, and he does pop up in the Journals of Old Ben Kenobi. Now, for clarity, a Wookiee is Chewbacca's species. I presume you guys would know that, but just to be sure. Now, Too Bleak is actually a different species. Too Bleak is a Kubaz. Now, a Kubaz, K-U-B-A-Z, they have a long snoot, or rather, they have like a long nose, almost kind of like an elephant in a way, like a trunk sort of thing, but there's a character nicknamed Long Snoot from A New Hope. They are the informant. They're the one who, when in A New Hope, you get that person speaking to like some Imperials and comes up with subtitles. He kind of It looks a little bit like the doctors you saw from sort of the bubonic plague times and things. He's got big goggles on and then the nose and that sort of thing. And that character is actually called Garindar Ez Zavor. He's in the Certain Point of View book, which is 40 short stories from different points of view of characters that are side characters in A New Hope, and there's also an Empire Strikes Back edition as well. Now, the character himself isn't really in much else, but the species is actually in a few other things. They show up in comics and books, but also in the first season of The Mandalorian, you do actually see some of those species. So if you see a species with like a long nose similar to an elephant, in some ways, they are a Kubaz. Now, after the Imperials have been taken care of, Aphra, Black Chrysanthemum and Tublik were all there to take some cargo. Tublik pulls a gun onto Aphra, saying that the bounty on Aphra is far higher than the cargo. And then, before he can pull the trigger, a shot gets fired from in the distance, and it kills Tublik. Now, the person who fired this shot is a character called Just Lucky, who's a human male, seems to be around Aphra's age, sort of mid-20s, I would assume. And then shortly after that, Aphra manages to find a fossil, leaves the cargo behind because this fossil is apparently worth a lot more money than the cargo, and then they are escaping Imperials and the crew manage to bail. They fly away as an AT-AT pursues them. Now, an AT-AT, they were in Empire Strikes Back. They're called all-terrain armoured transports. They're very large. They're also called Imperial Walkers. And yeah, they're in Empire Strikes Back in Hoth. They're the big boys that have to get the cables wrapped around their legs and they fall on the ground. That's an AT-AT. It's also worth mentioning that in their escape, Just Lucky, yes, his name is Just Lucky, very on the nose, is sort of hanging on to the outside of transport, and Aphra yells out to him, "Get on board or I'll leave you behind like I did on Dathomir." Now, Dathomir, just quickly, is a really cool place. It's one of my favourite planets, I'd probably argue, in the Star Wars canon. It's the place that was shown in Clone Wars a fair amount. It's where the Night Sisters are from, which is where Mother Talzin and Asajj Ventress are from. It is also where Darth Maul and his brother Savage Opress are from. They are the Dathomirian Night Brothers. They are the species Zabrak, but they're like almost a subspecies of Zabrak that are only found in Dathomir, to my knowledge. And also Dathomir is a main planet to go to in the game Jedi Fallen Order, which is why I kind of fell in love with the planet in some ways, because the aesthetic to it is incredible, but it's quite a freaky place. But yeah, it's the birthplace of Darth Maul and Asajj Ventress and Mother Talzin, and is quite a cool place, but it's sort of entrenched in the dark side quite a lot. So I just thought I'd throw that out there, because that's a cool thing, and Dathomir doesn't really get mentioned in the canon much, unless those characters I just mentioned are specifically brought up. So yeah, the gang escape after all of that, and then you get the main screen in air quotes, which is where the crawl is. And for clarity, with all comics that I do on this, I do read out the crawls, even though some of them are like a sentence, and some of them are more a couple of paragraphs, but this one is a little bit longer. So let's get into it. The heroic Rebel Alliance is scattered and on the run after their defeat by the Empire at the Battle of Hoth. After narrowly escaping the vengeful Darth Vader and cutting all ties to her past, rogue archaeologist Dr. Chelli Aphra is back on the hunt for the rarest, most valuable treasures in the galaxy. With Aphra's cunning intellect and flexible moral compass, plus a new highly skilled team, the next huge payday is just around the corner. But there are some secrets in the dark corners of the galaxy that not even Dr. Aphra is prepared to uncover. And I wanted to add in here that the page that shows the crawl and things is actually quite cool. It's got, Dr. Aphra, the name of the arc, Fortune and Fate, part 1, and then it's also got, the writer, artist, and all the personnel involved. But it also has sort of sketches of the characters in this, Dr. Chelli Aphra, Black Chrysanthemum, and a couple of others that I'll get to later. But also, what I quite like is it's got their name in Arabesh as well as in standard English. So Arabesh is the in-universe main alphabet. It is pronounced the same way that Galactic Basic is, and for argument's sake, it depends what language you listen to Star Wars in as to what you would interpret Galactic Basic to be. But as the native language that Star Wars programming is recorded in and things is English, or American English, however you want to put it, then Arabesh is spoken like English or American English. And it's just kind of cool seeing some of the symbols and things that you could, in theory, use this in a lot of ways to actually teach yourself Arabesh, because it's just English, but a substitution for each letter. Each letter basically looks different. But I thought I'd throw that out there because that's quite cool. And with that in mind, let's move on to the rest of the story. So it starts in a place called the Shadow University. Now, the Shadow University was mentioned in the 2016 run of the Dr. Aphra comics, specifically in issues 9 to 13, and I tackled that on episode 42 of Star Wars Comics in Canon. She essentially sells stolen stuff to them. That's really the long and the short of it. So she now sells this fossil that she found from Hoth to the Shadow University, and it's a fossil for a fork-nosed ice worm, and it's not mentioned anywhere else in the canon or from legends that I can see. It's just a cool random creature they've created for this fossil. So after she sells that to the Shadow University, she's then in a bar with Black Chrysanthemum and with Just Lucky. She gets approached by a person called Detta Yao, who is a young female human who's also a uni student, and she goes to the Shadow University as a student, and she wants to find something called the Rings of Vaal. It might be Vaal, it's Vaale. In essence, there are two rings. One of them is meant to give you boundless life, and the other one is meant to give you boundless fortune. Apparently, they're cursed, and Aphra doesn't really believe in curses and things. She says there's normally an explanation for those things. But they take Detta to an expert on the Rings of Vaal, which is Dr. Eustasia Ocker. Now, Eustasia Ocker is a Mirialan. Now, it's hard to pronounce. Mirialan. Mirialan. And she's a former classmate of Dr. Aphra's. Now, she's the same species as two quite well-known Jedi, one of which is Luminara Unduli, and the other one is her apprentice Barriss Offee. Now, you should remember those from the Clone Wars. If you've seen them, there's quite an important story arc involving Barriss Offee, and then Luminara Unduli. She does show up in the Clone Wars and whatnot, and she also does get mentioned in Rebels in a very specific episode that's quite cool as well. So, they are green-skinned, and there's also a character called Venestra Rowe, who is in the High Republic books at the moment, and I think she is actually in the High Republic comics at the moment as well. They're basically just green-skinned humanoids. They just look like people, but with green skin, and they often have some sort of facial markings that I think are often tattoos. Normally black shapes and things on their faces in some places, but yeah, they're basically just green humans. Now, Eustasia Ocker has a droid, which is TA418. Now, this droid is a BD unit. Now, BD units are fairly new to the canon. They were created for Jedi Fallen Order, and in Jedi Fallen Order, the game, which is an incredible game, I do really recommend you guys play it if you haven't already. The droid in Fallen Order is called BD1. They are fairly rare. They are companion explorer droids, and they're very cute. They're kind of like a really mini version of WALL-E from the Disney movie, but if you imagine sort of WALL-E's head, and instead of being the box tank sort of caterpillar track wheels, it's more just got two legs, so it kind of almost walks a little bit like a chicken, but it's like droid legs with this WALL-E typed head, and it has like a hollow projector and those sort of things on it. But they're normally used by people when you're exploring ruins and things, because they can scan things and take a lot of data and whatnot. But yeah, this one is called TA418. I think her name is Dr. Eustasia Ocker, actually. So Eustasia, she actually wrote an article about the Rings of Vaal, and she got expelled for insufficient credible research. And while they're speaking to her, they are in these ruins of Kolkur, which doesn't appear anywhere else. And she confirms that she said no to Ronan Tagge prior, and then Tagge's goons appear, start to threaten Eustasia, and then Aphra shoots a chandelier thing, which then causes a massive shootout to occur. Detta is using this poison blade thing she's got hidden in her wrist. Eustasia then throws an idol totem thing, which is just like a little person made out of stone, I presume. And then these big golem statues come alive and then start attacking. It is mental. The imagery in the artwork is really, really cool, so I do recommend checking this out. But essentially everything goes mental, and in all the pandemonium, they all manage to escape. They get aboard the Archangel number 3 and fly away. Now, the Archangel 3 is Aphra's ship. The Archangel 1 and the Archangel 2 were in the Aphra comics. I think the Archangel 1 was destroyed in the Darth Vader comics. I believe it was in the crossover event Vader Down. Then I think the Archangel 2 got destroyed in the 2016 Aphra run. So she's now on the Archangel 3. And they've all been different ships and things. And it isn't clear exactly what ship this is, so I'm not going to go into that. Now, I mentioned the Tagges, and I mentioned a character called Ronan Tagge. Now, you will remember the Tagge family because in A New Hope there is a character called Cassio Tagge. He was a major general and he opposed the Death Star. He was one who, when Darth Vader enters the room, when you've got Tarkin there and the rest of the higher-up Imperial officers, they're all talking about the Death Star and saying how, there could be some problems with it, and Tarkin is assuring them that no, there won't be any, that sort of thing. You should probably remember the scene from A New Hope. And Cassio Tagge is there. Now, he does actually survive the Death Star blowing up because he left it before it all exploded and things. And then he is in the Darth Vader comics, the 2015 run. He is kind of like an antagonist in some ways. I mean, he antagonizes Vader, but he is like the main villain in air quotes. I mean, obviously Vader, I presume, is technically the main villain, but he's not the main antagonizer of Vader. He's just one of them, and he appears in that. But he comes from basically a very rich family who are involved heavily with the Empire. So on this ship, the gang, which is now Just Lucky, Black Chrysanthemum, Detta Yao, Eustasia Ocker, and TA418, they all sort of sit around and discuss how Ronan Tagge is spoiled, and Aphra even says that she won't work for him because he's just too much. So they all kind of make an agreement and do a deal where Aphra gets paid, Detta gets to write like a thesis on it, and Eustacia will get the credit. They put their heads together and work out that the rings are likely on a planet called Dianth. It is a corrupted planet, and the inhabitants of it went mad. And then issue number 1 ends with the character Ronan Tagge on the planet Cantonica. Now, Cantonica is home to the city Canto Bight. Now, Canto Bight is a casino city, similar to Vegas in a lot of ways, I would presume, and it's actually what you see in The Last Jedi. When Rose and Finn go off on their little adventure together, that is the place that they go. And there is also a book about it, I think it's called like Tales from Canto Bight or something along those lines. But anyway, Ronan Tagge is in Canto Bight. He has paintings and sculptures in this penthouse that he has, and he's got someone who made the painting and got someone who made the sculpture there, and they're looking very scared. He's trying to work out which one he likes the most, and he decides that he likes them both equally. So what he does is he puts them into a disintegrator and destroys them, because his whole weird thing is he wants to be the last person to touch something truly unique and incredible, and then destroys it. And the last few panels of these are the goons of Tagge going up to him and saying that they failed to retain Eustacia Oka, she refused your offer and escaped with Chelly Aphra. And Tagge remembers who Aphra is, telling his thugs to disperse the fleet and comb the galaxy if he has to, because for Aphra and the others, we have an old debt to settle. So that's where issue number 1 ends. There's lots of bits of connective tissue there, and for the rest of these issues there's not quite as much connective tissue, but there is a bit. So with that in mind, let's move on to issue number 2. So the first page of issue number 2 starts with a flashback. It shows that years ago in the University of Barleth, Aphra and Eustacia are chatting and things. They have a little kiss, and also Eustacia mentions the High Republic, saying she's doing a dissertation on the lost legends of the High Republic, which is a fun little foreshadowing, because obviously when this came out, that was around the time the High Republic had been announced and whatnot. Now, I did just want to flag here something that I had to look up and I wasn't actually aware of. Now, the University of Barleth has been mentioned before. It's been mentioned alongside the Shadow University. I believe they're both almost like slightly rivals in certain ways, but Aphra's had run-ins with both of them. And in the first Aphra comic, so Dr. Aphra number 1 in the 2016 run by Kieran Gillen, there's the main story, which is like 22 odd pages, and then there's kind of like an epilogue story, and the epilogue story is actually a flashback to when Aphra was in the University of Barleth. And there's a tiny bit of dialogue that I actually missed, and she actually asks Sana to do a favour for her. Now, Sana is Sana Starros, who is in the main run of Star Wars comics primarily, and also she gets entangled with Aphra later on in this run, but also in that 2016 Aphra run, she pops up a little bit, and she's also kind of a friend of Han Solo's and things. Sana Starros is a very cool character who really more people need to know about. But I just found it quite interesting, because when I did the first episode of Dr. Aphra, back to I think episode 34 of Star Wars Comics and Canon, I wasn't actually aware that Sana Starros' name was mentioned in the very first issue. So I just thought that was cool that Aphra seemingly went to university with Sana Starros, as well as Eustacia, and also the University of Barleth was also mentioned in the first Lando comic, which is Lando number 1, and I tackled that on episode 18 of Star Wars Comics and Canon, and the university is also mentioned in the Legends of Luke Skywalker book as well. So anyway, it shows nowadays on the Archangel number 3, and TA418 got a message from Tagge offering help and resources to locate these rings of Val, but then also threatens that if she doesn't take his help, then he will show her and Aphra no mercy. Eustacia questions how he seems to know who Aphra is, and after a bit of persuading, Aphra then confirms that she met Tagge before. She got him some coral from the Alderaan Sea. Now, obviously Alderaan was destroyed in A New Hope, so anything from that planet at all is incredibly rare and valuable. So she got some coral that was only found in the oceans of Alderaan, and so he was going to disintegrate it, because obviously his weird thing of being the last person to touch something major or unique and destroying it. So in response, she stole lots of other artifacts, and then ran away. She confirms that she did sell them and things, and a lot of his artifacts he managed to get back, but it cost him apparently 3 times as much money as he bought them initially, because he had to buy them off the black market. So anyway, the Archangel 3 lands on the planet of Dianth. They find the city, which is called the Lost City of Val, and it shows that there are walls that are carved in very intricate and strange ways, and it appears that they have been made from bone. You see sort of Detta look up to it, and then the faces that are carved out of there start to move and things, and while that's happening, just like he confirms, he hears a strange high-pitched noise that other people can't seem to hear. As they were walking around and things, and the art is really cool in this, so once again recommend people check this out. It's on Marvel Unlimited and stuff if you have that. And Aphra says that this place, because it's so old and lost and etc., it should be ruins, but it seems like it's pristine, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. Then Black Chrysanthemum seems to see something in the corner of his eye, it's like a foot that runs past, and Aphra once again doesn't see it. They continue to explore the city, and then Eustacia finds a floor mural, and it appears to be a map that shows that there's the architect's workshop which is found underneath the mural itself. They manage to find a hatch, they go underneath, and they find some murals of the High Republic, so paintings on the wall from that sort of era, and that has that kind of iconography. And as they're making their way down, Eustacia warns of some of the things that are said on these murals about the Rings of Vaal. I'm just going to read it out because it's a little bit easier than me paraphrasing. So as they're climbing down, Eustacia says, "Those images are warnings. The rings are to be used together, not separately. The ring with the sapphire gem grants its wearer eternal life, but drives them to madness. The ring with the crimson gem grants its wearer incredible fortune, but hastens their eventual demise. If worn by the same person, the ring will bless the wearer with eternal fortune, eternal life, and abilities to rival most powerful Force users. Or, so the stories suggest." And Aphra comments saying there's no way that Ronan believes that. And Eustacia says, well, regardless of their power, they're priceless, and I'm sure he understands that part. So the gang eventually come to a large door, just like he can hear the noise getting louder and louder, this high-pitched noise, and this door they've come to is locked. There is a key slot, but they believe that the key slot is likely more of a decoy, given the rest of the city and whatnot, and then this humanoid thing crawls at them, telling them to leave. It kind of looks like an alien, but it kind of looks like a mutant. It's got this weird little arm growing out of the top of its face. It does look a little bit unnerving. It's got a sort of maybe a zombie feel to it in some ways, but it's an alien species as well. As they're all freaking out about this thing that's kind of crawling towards them, that's quite weird, and then apparently the high-pitched noise is getting worse, and then this door with these carved faces and things on, they seem to be moving and making noises as well. So Aphra decides to shoot the mutant thing on the floor and mentions to everyone to keep it together because there's a difference between a curse and a mutation. She says the door is creepy, but it's not alive, and everyone still seems a bit freaked out, and they're kind of hesitant to accept Aphra's explanation. So after they've calmed down a little bit, they decide to split up and try and find some way to get this door open. Just like he goes to Eustacia, and while they're going off and looking elsewhere, Aphra says that she didn't see the door moving or hear the noise that Just Lucky is hearing and things, and she questions whether or not it could be hallucinations. And this is further evidence because when they ask Just Lucky, what did you see when I shot that mutant thing? He said it had 6 arms, whereas Aphra seemed to only see it with 2, and Detta said that it didn't look like either of those descriptions to her. After a little while, Detta manages to find a device in a wall. As she discovers it, it starts to make this sort of alarm noise, and Black Chrysanthemum and Just Lucky shoot it. As it gets destroyed, the floor starts to rumble, it then splits and breaks apart, and then Black Chrysanthemum, Just Lucky, and Eustacia all fall down this pit in the middle, and Detta, Aphra, and TA are then surrounded by Tagge's men, and that is where issue number 2 ends. So issue number 3 starts with Just Lucky, Black Chrysanthemum and Eustacia waking up after surviving the fall. They've got a couple of wounds, but Black Chrysanthemum has got a Bacta spray. Now for clarity, Bacta spray is in the Mandalorian, it's towards the end of series 1 actually. You see IG-11 use it on the Mando. And if people aren't already aware, Bacta is just like the magic healing goo in Star Wars. Around the time of the High Republic was when Bacta started getting made in much higher volumes and things, where it started to spread across the galaxy. Before that, they used a slightly weaker, different thing to try and heal wounds, but it wasn't quite as widely used. It's in the original trilogy a bit. Normally when someone gets really wounded, let's be honest, when Luke gets really badly wounded, he goes into a Bacta tank to heal. It just means that things heal quicker and whatnot. And Darth Vader is seen to be in a Bacta tank in Rogue One as well, when Krennic goes to his fortress on Mustafar to see him, because obviously it's probably one of the only places Vader can be where he's not in agonizing pain due to his burns and the suit and all that sort of stuff. So it's just a magic healing thing that's been in the galaxy at this point for over 250 years, but is like the cutting edge of healing technology. It's like a super anesthetic almost that also speeds up healing. So anyway, that trio are obviously at the bottom of the pit, and as Aphra, Detta and TA are at the top of the pit after they're getting surrounded by Tagge's men, Aphra then makes a deal with Tagge. Now the trio in the pit can hear everything relatively that Aphra is saying, and they can hear her making the deal, so they want to try and find the rings before she does. Just Lucky comments that there must be a spy in their midst, because how else would Tagge's men have found them so quickly, and Eustacia thinks that it's Aphra because she does that kind of thing a lot. Meanwhile, Aphra tells Tagge's men to spread out and search the area for a key, warning of some traps. As that happens, some traps start going off, someone gets zapped by a thing that pops out of a wall and then dies, and these 4 giant arms pop out of the middle of the pit and start grabbing people and slamming down all around and things, and there's not a lot of room to be able to maneuver. The majority of the room is now taken out by this pit in the middle. And as this is happening in the pandemonium, Detta was sweet-talking one of the thugs, and then once all the hands jump out and things start going a bit mental, Detta then kicks that thug into the pit. Now the trio who are back down the pit, they get attacked by some more of these mutant things that appeared earlier. Black Chrysanthemum shoots one, and then they immediately all just completely disappear. They're all a little bit confused by that, but decide to just keep on pushing on, and as they keep going out throughout the tunnels, the noise in Just Lucky's head seems to keep getting louder, and then they soon find a marked door. Meanwhile, the thugs up with Aphra and Detta are slowly getting taken out by these giant hand things. There's less and less space, and then one of the hands misses Aphra and Detta and makes a hole in the wall behind them, which is where they were looking at that door is next to. So Aphra and Detta head into this wall, and Aphra finds a workshop where the rings were created, and simultaneously Eustacia finds the mausoleum, which is where the ring's final resting place was. And it's quite a cool page where you see it split down the middle, and on one side you've got Aphra discovering the workshop and you've got Eustacia discovering the mausoleum. So they head into the respective rooms. Eustacia finds the red ring, which is the ring of fortune, and Aphra instead finds an empty case where the blue ring would have been. And then while they've got a moment alone, she confronts Detta on her behaviour. She notices that Detta has been all sweet and innocent and seeming that way all this time, but she's actually acting a lot like Aphra did at that age. You know, she notes that she's got the sort of poison spikes, daggers things that come out of her wrists that she uses as weapons. She also kicks that guard down the pit a little bit earlier on. So she's just like, I know what you're doing. You're acting all naive and things and innocent, and that's fine, but just be aware that I've been down that path. I know where it kind of goes. They're kind of arguing about that because, you know, Aphra sees herself in Detta. Detta is saying that you're just projecting on me. And it shows that there's actually panels of parallels once again, where it's got Aphra saying, I bet you did this, this and this. And it shows that Aphra doing it when she was that age, and then also Detta doing it something very, very similar at that age as well. While they're discussing things, Just Lucky, Black Chrysanthemum and Eustacia then enter the room. Detta then pulls a blaster on Eustacia for the ring, but it shows that it's actually gone from the pouch that Eustacia was holding it in, and it shows that Just Lucky has it. While Detta is distracted by Just Lucky having the ring, Aphra then shoots Detta, who collapses to the floor. And then this comic ends with Just Lucky holding onto the ring as the thugs enter, calling him boss, and he confirms that yes, no one pays like the Tagges, and it shows that Just Lucky was the one who betrayed them all along. So issue number 4 starts with Just Lucky along with the thugs at the entrance where that mural on the floor was. So they come out of that hatch and then they put lots of rocks and boulders and things on top of the hatch so the rest of the crew who are in the pit can't get out. So you've got Black Chrysanthemum trying to push up on this hatch thing, but they can't get out. It shows that Detta is seemingly fine. It looks like Aphra may have killed her in the previous comic, but she seems to be okay, so it seemed to just be a very peculiar looking stun, and she's now got binders on her hands. They decide to look for an alternate exit to try and escape, and it shows that the droid TA finds a little garbage chute, so they go into that, which leads into the sewers. Eustacia confirms she ran tests on the bone matter and says that it seems to be emitting frequencies that target brainwaves. In essence, it's sort of singing. Due to that singing, that seems to be what has been making people hallucinate, what's been messing with people if they're hearing noises or seeing things, that sort of stuff. And it turns out that the rings of Val aren't the things that made people mad in the city. It was actually the city's own security system that kind of went a little bit AWOL that made everyone in the city go mad. So the gang, as they follow through the sewers and things, they get towards the exit and Aphra takes the cuffs off of Detta, telling her, make sure I don't regret this. They head to the Archangel number 3, and then Tagge's thugs' ships fly over the top and blow up the ship, meaning Aphra now has lost 3 Archangel ships. They then blow up the city itself shortly after, and then it shows Just Lucky on a ship that is now away from the planet. He's still hearing the sound that he mentioned, and he's holding on to the Ring of Fortune, which is the red one. It shows that the reason that Just Lucky is actually working for Tagge is because he owes Tagge big time for his brother's financial situation, and so Just Lucky had to make a deal. It's confirmed that his brother basically has a gambling addiction, and it's his younger brother as well. So it soon shows Just Lucky lands on Canto Bight along with the thugs. They manage to get to the penthouse, which is where Tagge is waiting for them, and Tagge offers them 1/3 of the cut because he wanted Eustacia and the 2 rings as well. As they've only delivered 1 ring, he just gives them 1/3. Just Lucky and his crew don't seem to be overly happy with this, then Tagge makes a veiled threat, gives them a certain look, and then tells them to go to the casino, my treat. And as one of the thugs starts to get quite animated by this, Just Lucky grabs him and says, thanks, we'll take it, and then leaves with the rest of the crew. Just Lucky goes to the casino area and sees his brother, who seems to be playing slot machines. And while that's happening, it shows that Black Chrysanthemum, Aphra, Detta and Eustacia find a High Republic ship on that planet that seems to work. While they're on the ship and making all the checks and things before liftoff, Aphra says that something seems to be missing, because Tagge wouldn't have shot and destroyed the entire city if the other ring was there, unless he knew it was somewhere else. Aphra's trying to work out what to do, and she suggests to the gang for them to all just leave and bail and just kind of cut their losses. Eustacia, however, refuses this and asks for what the best plan would be, because she wants Tagge to pay. It then shows that Aphra has managed to track Tagge using the droid message, because obviously at the start he put a message through TA-418, so she uses that kind of reverse tracker or something to manage to find out where they were. So they go to the planet of Cantonica. They get these ships that are surrounding the planet to pursue them and things. Aphra gives chase and flies around a bit, and is speaking to them over the comms, and then Tagge's ships manage to shoot their engine, and then their ship gets boarded. The gang then all get captured, they get taken down to planetside to meet Tagge, and then the last panel of issue 4 is Aphra mentioning it's all part of the plan. So we move on to the final comic of this story arc, issue number 5. So it starts off with Black Chrysanthemum, Dr. Aphra, Detta Yao and Eustacia Oka all in Tagge's penthouse. There are artifacts and paintings and even daggers on the walls. There's loads of cool stuff. There's nothing that specifically stands out as a reference to anything else in particular, but it all just looks quite nice. While they're being guided around the penthouse, TA-418 sneaks off. So Tagge is talking to the rest of the gang. Obviously he didn't notice the little droid sneaking off, and it shows that he actually had the blue ring, which is the immortality ring. Now I'm just going to read a bit of what Tagge has to say about this. You of all people should know that the rings of Vaal are a matching set. And the rest of the gang are a bit surprised by this, and Aphra says, so that's why we only found one. You had it all along. I didn't expect you to be wearing it though. And now this is the sort of monologue bit of Tagge. It's quite a cool bit of artwork actually. It's him there and it's got his sort of whole family there as well. But yeah, this is what he says. This ring came into my family's possession many, many generations ago. One of my relatives acquired it from an infamous space pirate. In time, the ring came to signify our greatness. Of course, it was Tagge cunning and superiority that built our immense dynasty. Still, it was a pretty story for a pretty trinket. It wasn't till I read your research, Professor Oka, that I understood exactly what I had. Half of a puzzle, half a legend, adding to the value of a precious family heirloom, making it even more tempting to destroy. And once I knew there was another ring, I simply had to have the whole set. And Eustacia says, and instead of preserving that legacy, you want to ruin it like a spoiled child. And Tagge says, do you know what makes a storyteller great? Knowing how to bring a saga to an end. Tonight I will make history, and the rings of Vaal will be no more. After you've witnessed their destruction, I'll destroy you too, and the last living memories of the rings in the galaxy. So as Tagge enters his disintegration chamber, Aphra calls out and says that the rings actually work, it's not just a legend, and she actually offers a demonstration, and she pushes Eustacia forward. She says to put a ring on each of Eustacia's hand, and then says to put her in there and disintegrate. And obviously, because the rings work, she won't get disintegrated. But if Aphra is wrong and the rings don't actually work, then it's a win-win situation, because then he manages to disintegrate both the rings and also Eustacia as well. Eustacia asks Aphra why she would do such a thing, and Aphra just responds saying it's her insatiable curiosity. So the doors close in the disintegration chamber, and just before the buttons get pressed, you get a little panel of TA-418 turning a little switch at a terminal somewhere. So lights flash, everyone's kind of gasping, and then it shows that Eustacia is there and she survives. So Tagge takes the rings off her, and he says it will make him more powerful than even the Emperor, it would make him a god. Then Aphra kicks him into the chamber and starts slicing the control panel, and then the thugs quickly figure out what's going on and try to stop her. Detta Yao is fighting the thugs with her poison-tipped blade and things, and Detta says Aphra has about 30 seconds. So Aphra is frantically trying to slice, and then tells Eustacia to press the button when she says so. She does that, and then there is a big explosion. It shows the explosion is massive, even being seen from outside of the building, and it shows that Just Lucky is down in the Crescent Royale Casino, and there's some screens on there showing that breaking news, there's been an explosion that has rocked the Tagge Pavilion, and Lucky sees it and goes, uh-oh, and tells his brother that he has to go back to work. So in the penthouse itself, it shows that Black Chrysanthemum is attacking some thugs, while a lot of the others are kind of recovering and trying to get up from the floor. Detta Yao manages to grab Aphra and Eustacia, gets them out of binders, and she confirms the Black Chrysanthemum got her out of binders earlier when Tagge was monologuing, so they manage to escape. They're now on the Archangel number 4, and Eustacia says she wasn't fully happy not knowing the entire plan. Aphra says that she's sorry, that she needed her reactions to be genuine, and she gives Eustacia several artifacts that she managed to steal from the penthouse that her and Detta managed to get their hands on, and she says that a few of these should be enough to get her reinstated in the university. They do mention that it's going to be a shame that the lost city of Val, they don't really have anything to be able to prove it, and Eustacia says, well, she's got TA418 who got lots of scans of things, took loads of samples, and she even took a souvenir. And then the final few pages of this comic shows that Just Lucky goes into the penthouse after Aphra and that lot have all escaped, and he finds Ronan. He is heavily burnt. It looks like essentially his skin has been burnt off. It's pretty horrendous, but he just about seems to be alive. He calls to get a medic and then reports to someone called Domina Tagge, which is where this issue ends. Now, for anyone who's been listening to the War of the Bounty Hunters episodes I've been doing, which is episodes 60 and 64, you'll already know who Domina Tagge is. But if you haven't yet listened to those, then in a few episodes' time, I'll be doing the next of these Aphra comics, and then that'll be the story arc that is the precursor to the War of the Bounty Hunters prelude. And then from there, you guys will be able to get all the way through the Aphra stories, because the War of the Bounty Hunters is going to be going on until October, so I think my episodes will run until November sort of time. And then after that, I'll figure out the sort of game plan of where to go, because obviously each month we're going to get one issue, and story arcs are generally between 4 and 6 issues. So generally there's a new arc every 4 to 6 months. So I'll figure out how we kind of venture into those in the future. But that is basically the end of this episode. I've got a few bits of information of what we're going to be doing going forward. So as I've mentioned in the last few episodes, I'm actually going away for the next 2 weeks. So on the main feed of Genuine Chit-Chat and also on this feed of Star Wars Comics and Canon, there's going to be an ever so slight change of programming. What I've managed to do is I have recorded a book review for the High Republic novel A Test of Courage. Now that was released within the first 3 books of the High Republic back in January, February time. And I've already done the book review for A Light of the Jedi by Charles Soule, which is the main, air quotes, adult novel. Then there's the young adult novel by Claudia Gray, which is Into the Dark. And then there's the sort of middle grader novel, which is A Test of Courage. Now, A Test of Courage is the one that I've done. It is a sort of younger reader in a sense, but I was very much surprised of how much I enjoyed it. So I've done a book review. I seem to remember pre-editing, it's around 40 minutes long. So I think it'll be about half an hour long, and I don't spoil it either. I give, what I did with other book reviews, where the first half of it is spoiler free and just information that you get on the back of the book, or a very small amount that you got some press releases and things before the book got released. And then I give a warning, and then I give a bit more information into the characters and the themes and those sorts of elements as well. So that should be out next week. And then the week after that will be a special thing where anyone who's familiar with my Patreon, which is patreon.com/genuinechitchat, I recently had an episode airing on this very feed, actually. The TV and movie show, when Chris and Dave, when they released Spider-Man 3, they do a little intro, but then the main chunk of the conversation, which is about half an hour in the middle, myself and Megan talk about Spider-Man 3, and I'll give you a little hint here. Megan was not a fan, but it's a very fun conversation, and then Chris and Dave end it as well, so that was a fun little thing to do. So if you did hear that episode and you really enjoyed it, consider supporting me on Patreon. It's only £1 a month, which is, it would mean the absolute world to me, and you get access to a whole RSS feed, which has got early access to certain content, genuine chit-chat stuff. Whenever a 2-parter conversation drops, when part 1 drops on the main feed, all patrons get access to the full unsplit episode with part 1 and part 2 contained within it. And also you get the afterthoughts at least once a week, which me and Megan do. And I started to do some afterthoughts on comics as well. So I've done one for Death in the Family, which is the Batman story, and A Lonely Place of Dying, which connects to that. And then I've just recorded an episode on 3 Jokers as well, which is fairly self-explanatory by the title. And I don't do any spoilers for 3 Jokers. I think that one was about 10 minutes as well. So I'm starting to do a few afterthoughts on comics that I read that aren't going to be Star Wars comics, and I'm also doing things with Megan where we watch TV series and movies and things. We've recently done an episode on Space Jam, both the original one and A New Legacy. That's going to be out soon. Of the time recording this, I think it'll be out in a couple of days. We've done one for V for Vendetta, which is a really cool one to do. And then we've also done sort of other newer films as well. We recently saw The Suicide Squad, so I think we're going to do an episode on that. There's lots of bits and pieces and TV series and all kinds of stuff. And the episodes we do on the new films, We don't do spoilers on those either. So if you want even more content from myself, if you liked hearing me and Megan and the banter that we have, and if you want just a bit of extra content with TV movie reviews that aren't specifically linked to comic book stuff, and you want to have some afterthoughts to do with comics as well that are not Star Wars related, consider checking out the Patreon page, because it genuinely mean the absolute world to me if you checked that out. But in essence, the reason I kind of plugged that, it will nicely segue into the second week that I'm away, so the week after I release Test of Courage, I'm going to be releasing some of the Star Wars Patreon stuff that I did. So me and Megan did a big Star Wars rewatch. We've recorded the episodes on the prequel trilogy, Solo, Rogue One, and the original trilogy, and I think we've recorded one on The Force Awakens now as well. I think. If I haven't and patrons are listening, I do apologise. We'll have to get on that. But we are doing a whole Star Wars run through, and it's quite interesting because obviously I've seen them God knows how many times, and Megan's seen them quite a few times, but it's quite good at getting sort of different perspectives on certain elements of those things as well. So I'll be releasing that on this feed as a sort of bonus to save me having to read comics while I'm on holiday and things and have to spend ages editing and whatnot. So that'll be that, and then once I return, I'll be doing the War of the Bounty Hunters, which will be the second chapter of that, which will be a lot of fun to do and release. So that's what you can generally expect from me in the next month or so, and then once I've done the War of the Bounty Hunters, it will go to the normal schedule. I believe then it will be the first volume of the 2020 run of Star Wars comics, and then after that it will be the next volume of the Darth Vader comics, and then it will keep going until Star Wars will have caught up with War of the Bounty Hunters, Aphra will have caught up with War of the Bounty Hunters, the Vader comics should be finished in a few months as well, and then I'll start tackling the 2020 Darth Vader comics that will run into War of the Bounty Hunters, and I think I'll tackle the standard Bounty Hunters comics as well, because unsurprisingly they're going to go into the War of the Bounty Hunters, and then once they all kind of align, that will be around the time that the War of the Bounty Hunters crossover finishes, and then from there I'm likely going to start doing the Poe Dameron series for 1 week a month, the High Republic series for 1 week a month, and then I'll kind of go from there. I'm planning on doing another book review. I am currently reading The Rising Storm. I do want to do a book review for Into the Dark as well. I kind of want to leave them late enough so that, there's hundreds of people releasing book reviews for a lot of these things as soon as the things drop. And I just it takes me a little bit longer to read because obviously where I'm reading all of these Star Wars comics, as well as trying to read a lot of the Star Wars books, as well as reading non-Star Wars related content as well. There's also the book club that's coming out in Comics in Motion, the second one of those. I think that's probably going to be sort of September-y time just because everyone's been so busy in August, and that's going to be the Art Spiegelman comic or graphic novel called Mouse. So there's just so many things I'm reading and being involved with as well as my normal life, so I don't always have the time to be able to read a book within the first 2 days of it coming out and record a review on it. But I've had really good positive feedback from the reviews so far, so I presume you guys all enjoy them. But yeah, that's mainly it. Aside from that, guys, always make sure you check the show notes in these episodes, whether you're on YouTube or you're listening on a podcast app, or Spotify, which is kind of a podcast app now. Make sure you check the description because I include details and links to all the other stuff I've been involved with. I've done lots of guest spots recently. I was on an episode of Star Wars Timeline, which is a YouTube show. He has a podcast on there called Timecast. I went on there and spoke about the differences in the 3 trilogies, obviously prequels, originals, and sequels. Ben is an absolutely awesome guy. If you really enjoy my show, you'll probably quite enjoy Star Wars Timeline. He does lots of shorter videos, just like 1 minute long, just about species and about planets and those sort of things. And he also does longer episodes about more specific things as well. And his podcast is really, really cool to listen to. He has lots of interesting guests on there. And on this very feed as well, I was on a recent episode of Indie Comic Spotlight where myself and Tony Farina talk about Mark Russell's first volume of Flintstone comics, which really surprised me. If you've ever seen the Flintstones cartoons, go listen to our chat on the Flintstones comics. We don't spoil the whole plot of the volume. We talk about certain elements that we really like and 1 or 2 of the issues of comics in particular. And we talk about how it compares differently to the original cartoons that we remember and the reimagining of the Flintstones. It's a really, really fun thing, and it genuinely surprised me how much I enjoyed the Flintstone comics because I was a little bit skeptical because I'm not the biggest Flintstones fan. I enjoyed it a bit when I was a kid, but as an adult I've never really watched any of it. But if you want to check that out as well. And I've also been on an episode of Mandatory Marvel and DC recently. I think it was episode 26. And it's where myself and Max Byrne talk about the new 52 Batman comic called Endgame, which is one of the best Joker stories in my opinion. Aside from that, there's all the other stuff I've been involved with. I mean, all the recent things I've been doing have been Comics in Motion stuff, except I've been on the show recently, which is called Have Not Seen This. And I spoke about one of my all-time favourite movies, which is The Way, Way Back. If you haven't seen that film, you need to watch that film. I believe it's on Disney Plus now, at least in the UK. It's in the Star section, but if you just search for Way Way Back, it will come up like immediately. And it's just such a great film with Sam Rockwell and Maya Rudolph and Steve Carell. It's an all-star cast, and it's just a really, really good people movie. And Rafe, the host, was very nice to have me on his show, and he enjoyed it as well, which is good. So make sure you check out that film because it's great, and then go check out my appearance on Have Not Seen This. A link to that is in the description as well. And then there's a few other bits and pieces that I'm kind of guesting on recently that's going to come out of the woodwork soon, so I'll make sure to keep you guys updated in that regard. But I will say that I will make sure I try and do some sort of intro, outro, probably an outro-y thing with the book review. With the Patreon thing, I will try and do a little recording for that as well, just to make sure, but I haven't decided if I'm taking all my podcasting equipment when I go on holiday yet. If I do, then it'll be nice quality. If not, I will warn you that the intro or outro may be recorded with my phone, which isn't too bad, to be honest, but just thought I'd warn that. Anyway, guys, thanks as always for tuning in. Make sure you check out all the other amazing shows on Comics in Motion. Please leave reviews wherever you listen to this show. Comment on YouTube if you're listening on there. If you're on podcasting apps, make sure you share with lots of people. Anyone you know who likes Star Wars, try and share the show with them, because I try and specifically make this show to be fun for anyone, whether you've never read a Star Wars comic or if you've read all of them. So please spread the love of Comics in Motion and of Star Wars comics in canon. Check out all the other stuff I've been guesting on. I'll talk to you next Saturday with the A Test of Courage book review. And as always, guys, thank you so much for listening, and may the Force be with you. The intro for Star Wars Comics in Canon is arranged by myself, Mike Burton, and the backing music was made by Eric Matias of soundimage.org.
You have just experienced host, creator, everything elser of Genuine Chit-Chat, and also the host and creator of Star Wars Comics in Canon, found on the Comics in Motion podcast, Mike Burton.